Dad's lawyer read the will, he left it all to her. My cousin said, that's what you get for being the black sheep. But when I opened the box Mom gave me before she died, her face fell. You really thought you'd get something? After the way you distanced yourself from everyone? Delia said, swirling wine in a glass like she was in a movie. I didn't answer her right away. Instead, I quietly said, I think I'm finally starting to understand why I never belonged here. She laughed. That's rich. You always played the victim. I nodded slowly, then looked her in the eye. I found out why Dad left me nothing. And I found out who my real father was. Her glass paused midair. What are you talking about? There's a box, I said, the one Mom gave me before she died. And inside it, there was something that changes everything. I grew up feeling like a guest in my own home. Not unwanted, exactly, but like I was always auditioning for a role I wasn't cast in. My name's Mira. I'm 43 now, single, no kids, and I work as a librarian in Asheville, North Carolina. Quiet life, quiet town, and I've always liked it that way. My family, on the other hand, thrives on noise. Loud dinners, loud opinions, loud judgments. If you didn't toe the line, you weren't one of them. And I never really did. Growing up, I always sensed a sort of distance between me and my father. Charles. He was a man of real estate and rules. Measured affection, firm handshakes, eye contact that felt more like a job interview. I could never tell if he was proud of me. In fact, I could never tell if he liked me at all. My brother Royce, on the other hand, got all the approval. He was athletic, charming, and everything my father wanted in a son. My cousin Delia, too, Aunt Marianne's daughter, might as well have been a second child to him. Straight-A student, beauty pageants, always said the right thing, even when it wasn't true. Especially then. As I got older, I drifted. College was my escape, then I just never came back. Not for long. I sent cards, called on birthdays, visited maybe once a year. I wasn't running away from them, exactly. I just had no reason to stay. But 2 years ago, when my mom Anya was in hospice, I came back. I slept in the chair beside her bed, held her hand through long nights, and read aloud from the book she loved. One afternoon, just a few weeks before she passed, she handed me a small wooden box with a brass key taped to the bottom. When the time comes, she whispered, her voice barely there, you'll know. I didn't ask what was in it. I respected her enough not to. I took it home after the funeral and tucked it on the top shelf of my closet. And like so many things in life, I forgot it until the moment demanded remembering. Fast forward to this spring. My father died. Heart failure, sudden, but not entirely unexpected. I was notified by Royce a clipped voicemail that ended with, there's a will reading next Thursday. You might want to show up, or not. Up to you. When I pulled into the estate's driveway that Thursday, I hadn't seen the place in a decade. The old colonial-style house, the rosebushes Mom used to trim, now overgrown and wild. It looked both untouched and abandoned. The study was full Royce, Delia, Aunt Marianne, and Uncle Boyd, a couple cousins whose names I barely remembered. Mr. Penfield, my dad's lawyer, adjusted his glasses and launched into legalese. Royce got the cars. Delia, the lake house. Aunt Marianne and Uncle Boyd were granted stocks and accounts. And me? To Mira Davenport, Penfield said without looking up, I leave no inheritance. It is my wish that she not benefit from my estate. Silence. Then Delia muttered, that's what you get for being the black sheep. Everyone heard it. Nobody corrected her. No one even looked surprised. I said nothing. I just stood there, nodded once, and left. That night in the motel, I cried. Not because I wanted the money or the property. It was the rejection. The final, undeniable confirmation that I had been unwanted all along. A slap with a signature and a seal. I didn't sleep much. But somewhere around 3 a.m., I remembered the box. I drove straight home at sunrise, barely paused to take off my coat, and dug it out of my closet. The key clicked smoothly. Inside were a bundle of letters, a notebook, some photos, and documents neatly folded. The first letter began, "My darling Mira, if you're reading this, then the time has come. And there are truths you deserve to know." The letter went on for 6 handwritten pages. Mom's handwriting, elegant and sure as always, moved steadily across the lined paper. No hesitations. No corrections. It was clear she had written it knowing exactly what she needed to say. She started with her early years stories I already knew in fragments. Her college days in Chicago, her love for music, how she used to play piano at a little jazz bar in the South Loop to earn extra cash. But then, a name I didn't know appeared. Samuel Quinn. "My Mira," she wrote, "before I met Charles, there was Samuel. He was light and laughter and music. We were together for nearly a year. I was 19, he was 23, a jazz pianist with more soul than money. He loved me without reservation. And I loved him." The words blurred slightly as tears welled in my eyes. I kept reading. I became pregnant just as I got the scholarship to study in North Carolina. I was scared. But Samuel wanted to be a father. He asked me to stay in Chicago with him. He even proposed. I said yes. I said yes with all my heart. But my parents, they had other plans. They flew me home, convinced me it was a mistake. They told me I'd ruin my future, ruin his life, ruin everything. Then she met Charles. And Charles, wealthy and practical and respected, offered to fix everything. He would raise the child as his own, under one condition: silence. Samuel wasn't to be part of our lives. Ever. I don't know how she lived with that silence. How she watched me grow up under the eye of a man who never fully accepted me. How she stayed composed as I withered under his subtle disdain. The notebook was filled with her memories of Samuel, of their time together, and of me as a baby. Tucked inside the back cover was a photo. A younger version of Mom, smiling in a park, and beside her a tall, dark-skinned man with a trumpet case slung over his shoulder. He had one arm around her, the other holding a baby. Me. And then the papers. A trust fund document with my name on it. Dated nearly 2 decades ago. Signed by Samuel Quinn. The amount listed, $3.4 million. There were letters he had written to me, one for every birthday until he passed away in a car crash when I was 21. Letters he had given to my mom, hoping she'd pass them on when the time was right. She never did. I think now it was because she feared what Charles might do. Or maybe, more painfully, she feared what I might feel if I knew the truth too soon. And lastly, a deed. A modest 2-bedroom home in Asheville. Transferred into my name just a few weeks before Samuel's death. He had been preparing to reach out, my mother wrote. He'd never stopped following my life from a distance. I sat on the floor of my bedroom for what felt like hours. My entire identity, everything I believed about my place in the world, had been turned inside out. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something new. Not lost. Not rejected. Seen. Loved. Wanted. Not by Charles. But by the man who mattered. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not Royce, not Delia, not Marianne. I let them parade around, pretending they had won something. I let them talk about lake houses and auctioning cars and figuring out who would run Dad's investment firm. I started quietly working with a financial advisor. Verified the trust, had the deed recorded, and connected with a lawyer who had helped Samuel's estate. Everything was legitimate. Nothing contested. In the meantime, I visited the house in Asheville. It was small, but charming. Brick porch, ivy on the side, and a creaky wooden swing out front. There was an upright piano in the living room, keys yellowed with time, but the notes still sang. I didn't move in. Not yet. But I cleaned it. Sat in the sunroom and read some of the books he had left. Jazz history, poetry, first editions of Baldwin and Hughes. There was an old turntable in the corner and a crate full of vinyls. Billie Holiday, Coltrane, Davis. The music of my parents' love story. Each time I visited, I brought a box of my own things. Books. Candles. A small framed picture of Mom I kept on my nightstand. Little by little, it began to feel like home. But I knew eventually I'd have to face the rest of the family again. I didn't want revenge. I wasn't looking for vindication. But I wanted to say my piece. For once. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Royce organized a memorial reception for Dad at the country club he used to frequent. He called it a celebration of life, but it was more of a networking event for people who drank bourbon and traded stock tips. I wasn't planning to go. But something about standing in that room, looking them all in the eye, made me feel like I had to. Delia found me near the bar. Her hair was perfect. Her smile, smug. "You're braver than I thought, showing up," she said. "Not sure what you were expecting to get out of it, though." I didn't react. I was used to her digs. She leaned in, quieter now. "He was never going to give you anything, Mira. You were always too weird. Too soft." I looked at her for a long time before I answered. "Funny," I said. "I used to think that too. But it turns out I never belonged because I wasn't his." Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry?" "My real father," I said calmly, "was a man named Samuel Quinn. A jazz musician. He loved my mother. He loved me. And he left me something more valuable than anything your family could offer." Her eyes darted. "What are you talking about?" I smiled. "You'll figure it out. Or maybe you won't. It doesn't matter." Then I walked away. I walked away from Delia, heart racing but hands steady. The kind of steady that comes after years of doubt finally meet solid ground. I didn't need her to believe me. I didn't need her to ask questions or try to understand. Just standing there, telling the truth aloud, was enough. For me. The rest of the memorial passed in a blur of polite smiles and whispered speculations. I didn't linger. I wasn't there for closure or forgiveness. I was there to reclaim a piece of myself, and once I had it, there was no reason to stay. Back in Asheville, I found myself at Samuel's house more and more. At first, it was just a quiet place to think. But soon I started spending full weekends there. I would open the windows and let in the spring air, letting the music from the old records fill the space. I dusted off the piano and began playing again, clumsy at first, but something in my fingers remembered the way. Like muscle memory handed down through blood. I discovered little things about him in the house. A drawer filled with sheet music, notes scribbled in the margins. An old trench coat with a ticket stub in the pocket from a jazz club dated a year before I was born. A box of Polaroids labeled Chicago, 81. Mom in every photo, laughing, twirling, alive in ways I'd never seen. I realized then that this house wasn't just a place. It was a map to a version of myself I never got to know. By summer, I had made it official. I moved in, transferred my library job to a local branch, and slowly started unpacking a life I never thought I'd have. There was no ceremony about it. No grand declarations. Just a quiet, steady stitching of past into present. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from Aunt Marianne. I hesitated before opening it. Her voice in my head was always sharp, always echoing with judgment. But curiosity won. The letter was restrained. Careful. She wrote about how surprised she was by the things I said at the memorial. She claimed she'd never known about Samuel, though I could read between the lines and tell she suspected something over the years. She didn't apologize outright, but there was a sense of discomfort in her words, like someone trying to unmake years of assumptions without knowing how. She closed by saying she hoped I'd find peace. Peace. It wasn't a word anyone in my family used often. We dealt in appearances, in control, in narrative. Peace didn't come into the picture. It didn't fit with the Davenport way. But for the first time, I started thinking about what peace actually looked like for me. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, at least. And it wasn't some cinematic reckoning or confrontation. It was smaller than that. Softer. It was a morning spent barefoot in Samuel's kitchen, brewing coffee and watching the fog lift off the mountains. It was playing piano with the windows open and letting neighbors hear the music. It was getting mail addressed to Mira Quinn, because I'd changed my name quietly, legally, fully. The first time I saw it in print, on a piece of junk mail of all things, I stood in the doorway with the envelope in hand and cried. Not because of what I lost, but because of what I finally claimed. The name felt right. Like it had always been mine, waiting patiently for me to grow into it. Not long after that, I got a call from Royce. It had been over a year since we'd spoken. I debated answering. Let it ring twice. 3 times. Picked it up on the 4th. His voice was tight, too formal, like he wasn't sure how to talk to me anymore. Hey. Mira. Hi, Royce. Pause. I didn't know, about any of it. I figured. More silence. Then, he wasn't kind to you. I know that now. I guess I always knew, but I didn't think it was my place to say anything. I didn't respond right away. I let him sit in that discomfort. Finally, I said, you had a place. You just chose not to stand in it. I'm sorry, he said. There was something sincere in it. A flicker. Not enough to change everything. But maybe enough to shift something. He asked if we could meet. Catch up. I told him maybe. In time. I wasn't ready yet. I was still building something here, and part of that meant deciding what I wanted to let in, and what I didn't. Delia never reached out. And I didn't expect her to. We had both grown up learning how to keep score, but I no longer played that game. I had stepped off the field. Instead, I poured myself into what mattered. I started teaching music lessons at a community center a few blocks from Samuel's house. Kids mostly. Some retirees. People who didn't care about last names or legacies or who got written into what will. One of my students was a 10-year-old girl named Josie. Wild curls, quick fingers, and a laugh that reminded me so much of myself at that age it stopped me in my tracks sometimes. One afternoon, she looked up at me from the piano bench and said, "You play like your heart is singing." And I thought, maybe it is. Autumn settled over Asheville like an old quilt, thick, golden, a little heavy. The kind of fall that smells like smoke and apples, that makes everything feel slower and more meaningful. I found myself walking more, bundled in scarves, coffee in hand, watching the leaves tumble down the sidewalks near the community center. Life had taken on a rhythm I didn't expect. Not fast, not dramatic, just consistent. And that alone felt like a kind of miracle. On Saturdays, I taught beginner piano classes. On Sundays, I read poetry aloud at the library. I had fallen into a small but warm group of locals who didn't know my family name, didn't care about my past, and never once asked me what I had inherited. In fact, no one around here even knew I had once stood in a grand estate while a lawyer told a room of people that I'd been written out of a legacy. They only knew Mira. Music teacher. Librarian. Slightly awkward. Good with kids. Always bringing homemade muffins on rainy days. The anonymity was comforting. But the quiet couldn't last forever. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, I got another letter. This one wasn't handwritten. It was crisp, printed, and carried the very distinct letterhead of Penfield and Associates, the law firm that handled my father's estate. I almost threw it out. Almost. Instead, I sat on the porch swing with a blanket over my knees and opened it. It was from Penfield himself, or at least someone in his office. Apparently, in the months since my father's estate was divided, a few complications had arisen. Namely, a few assets that had not been clearly accounted for. One was a safety deposit box in his name. The bank had recently been acquired, and in the process of the merger, the box came up flagged because it included my name as a secondary holder. My name, Mira Davenport. Which meant it had been added long ago. Before I changed it. Before any of this. It didn't make sense. Charles wouldn't have included me in anything, not even by mistake. He had always made his indifference toward me very clear. Or so I thought. I called the bank the next morning. Arranged a time to visit. The woman on the phone was polite but vague. I didn't tell anyone. Not even the new friends I had slowly made in Asheville. I didn't want company. I didn't want opinions. I needed this one to be mine, whatever it was. The bank was in Hendersonville. Clean, bland, modern. A far cry from the dusty history I was dragging behind me. They led me to a private room, gave me gloves, and slid the box across the counter. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, there was no money. No jewelry. No bonds or precious heirlooms. Just 3 items. A faded manila folder. A gold lighter. And an old audio cassette tape labeled simply 1984. The lighter was engraved. CQD. Charles Quentin Davenport. It was his. The man who had barely looked at me for most of my life. The man who raised me without warmth. I turned it in my hands. Still worked. A small, perfect flame. The folder held paperwork. Pages and pages of things that made little sense until I hit the summary page at the back. It was a DNA test. Dated a few months before my 21st birthday. The test results were labeled in the old format, but the message was clear: probability of paternity, 0%. My hand went cold. I sat there, staring at that number, unable to move. He had known. Charles had known. Long before Mom passed. Before the will. Before he looked me in the eye and called me ungrateful. He had tested me. Quietly. Probably without telling her. He knew I wasn't his. And still, he never said a word. Never challenged my presence outright. Never confronted my mother. Never told me. But also never accepted me. He didn't leave me the house. Or money. Or a kind word. But he left me this as final proof. That he had always known. That he didn't forget me in the estate. He excluded me on purpose. The tape. I didn't even own a cassette player anymore. I left the bank dazed, the box held against my chest like it was radioactive. I drove straight back to Asheville, heart in my throat, mind buzzing. I remembered the little record store 2 blocks from the library. Run by a man named Linus with a beard down to his collarbone and the softest eyes I'd ever seen. He let me use the backroom cassette deck after I explained what I'd found. No questions asked. Just handed me headphones and a bottle of water. I sat in a dim corner and pressed play. White noise. Then, a voice. Him. Charles. Anya says I'm wrong, he said. Says she'll never forgive me for doing this behind her back. She's probably right. But I needed to know. Silence. More white noise. If she's not mine. I don't know what to do with that. I've tried. God knows I've tried. But I look at her and I just feel like a stranger is in my house. A stranger I'm supposed to love. Click. That was it. The rest of the tape was blank. I sat there for a long time after the audio stopped, staring into nothing. And then suddenly, surprisingly, I laughed. Not out of joy. Not bitterness either. Just a strange, sharp laugh that bubbled up because I realized, the man who'd tried so hard to exclude me still couldn't quite erase me. He needed me to know. Even after he was gone. It wasn't enough to keep me out of the will. He wanted me to understand why. He wanted control. One last time. I left the tape with Linus. Told him to toss it or keep it or bury it under a stack of Miles Davis LPs. I was done listening. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove. Windows down, wind cold against my skin, but I welcomed it. It kept me alert, focused. The cassette, the DNA results, the lighter, all of it was sealed back into the deposit box, and that box now sat in the passenger seat beside me. Not like a treasure. More like a completed chapter, closed but too heavy to throw away just yet. I parked in front of Samuel's house, my house, and sat in the car long enough for the streetlights to hum on. I thought about my father. Not Charles. Samuel. I thought about the music, the letters, the way he had cared even from afar. And then I thought about the people still clinging to the old story. Royce. Aunt Marianne. Delia. All of them still pretending that Charles was a great man. That I had been rightfully cut out. That everything in that will made sense. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I made coffee, sat at the old piano, and opened the first letter from Samuel again. Just to hear his voice in my head. Then I made some phone calls. Not for revenge. But for truth. 2 weeks later, I returned to Hendersonville. Not to the family estate, but to a hotel conference room I'd rented for one night under the name Mira Quinn. I invited the entire Davenport family. I wasn't sure how many would show, but I included everyone who had ever treated me like I didn't belong: Royce, Aunt Marianne, Delia, Uncle Boyd. Even the cousins I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. The invitation was simple. I have something important to share about Dad's estate. And about myself. You're welcome to attend, or not. They all came. Of course they did. Curiosity is a strong thing. And the Davenports hate unfinished stories. I stood in front of them with no notes, no podium. Just the lighter in my pocket and the folder of DNA test results tucked under my arm. You all know me as Mira Davenport, I began. Some of you have called me the black sheep. Some of you have barely spoken to me since I moved out at 18. Some of you think I was rightfully left out of Dad's will. A few uneasy glances. Delia crossed her arms. Well, I said, holding up the folder, Dad knew I wasn't his. He had me tested when I was 21. He never told anyone. Never told me. But he knew. And that's why he excluded me. I let that land. No one moved. My biological father was a man named Samuel Quinn. He loved my mother. He loved me. He left me a trust fund, a house, and letters for every year of my life. The man you all call Dad left me a lighter and a cassette tape of him admitting he never saw me as his child. Still no movement. But the energy in the room had shifted. I don't need anything from any of you, I said calmly. But I wanted you to hear the truth. Because for years, you told me who I was. You made me feel like I didn't belong. That I was strange, or weak, or wrong. But I was just different. And I was never one of you because I was never meant to be. I smiled. Then I pulled out the real card. I've also filed a petition to challenge part of the estate distribution, I said, casually placing a copy of the trust deed and DNA test on the table. Turns out that because Dad knew I wasn't his, and never legally disowned me, I'm eligible to contest the inheritance based on exclusion under false pretenses. My attorney says it's highly likely I'll succeed. Delia's eyes went wide. Marianne paled. But I'm not doing it for the money, I said, leaning slightly forward. I'm doing it so that when people search the court records, they'll see my name attached to his. They'll see the truth. Public and permanent. So you can't rewrite history. Then, the final nail. I've also decided to establish a scholarship in Samuel Quinn's name, for young musicians from underrepresented backgrounds. The fund will be significant. And it will be public. There will be interviews, Press. I met Delia's eyes. So the next time you tell someone I was the black sheep, they'll probably ask you why your cousin is on NPR talking about a jazz legacy and racial justice. She blinked. Swallowed. Said nothing. Aunt Marianne finally spoke. You always had a flair for drama, Mira. No, I said, picking up my coat. I just finally stopped trying to play a role in your story. I'm writing my own now. I walked out before anyone could respond. That night, I played Billie Holiday on the record player. Loud. Loud enough to reach the street. I danced barefoot in the kitchen, glass of wine in hand, the porch light casting long shadows through the window panes. I wasn't angry anymore. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free. They could keep their inheritance. Their cocktail parties. Their cold approval. I had music. I had truth. I had peace. And finally, I had the last word.